This happened in the early fall a few years ago. A few friends and I had planned a hike in the Boston Mountains, deep in the Ozark National Forest. We were staying near Jasper and had heard about a lesser-known trailhead from a local at a gas station. He called it a scenic little climb with some real solitude. And he wasn't kidding. We started late, later than we should have. It was one of those golden October afternoons where the leaves were burning orange and red, and the air still carried the lingering breath of summer. My friends, Ben and Josh, were in far better shape than me. They kept surging ahead, eager to get to the top while I trudged behind, slower but steady. We didn't have cell service out there, so we agreed to meet at the overlook if we got separated. Somewhere along the switchbacks, I came to a fork in the trail. There were no signs or markers, no footprints. And I stood there for a moment, trying to remember if we had taken this split on a map earlier that morning. My friends had the paper map and I didn't even have GPS. I figured left looked slightly more worn down, so I followed it. Another mile or two in, and there was another fork. This time I went right. After a while I realized I hadn't seen or heard anyone in over an hour. No sign of my friends and no trail markers. It was just me alone in the woods. And then the quiet set in. Not the usual hush of a deep forest, but an unsettling kind of quiet. There were no insects, no birds. Even the wind seemed to stop moving through the trees. Just a dead, heavy stillness. I stopped walking and listened hard, but I couldn't hear anything. No twigs crackling in the underbrush, no distant hum of an engine. No signs of anything. That's when I noticed my water bladder was empty. Panic didn't hit all at once. It was more like a slow, creeping realization. I was alone in a part of the Ozarks I didn't know, with no map, no water, and no clear idea of which way was out. But I kept going, hoping with each bend it would bring some familiar landmark, a sound, a person. But each step only led me deeper into the ever-darkening forest. As the sun began to lower, my body started to crash. My thighs were cramping, my calves felt like they were wrapped in fire, and every step sent a jolt of pain up my spine. My head began to pound and I was soaked with sweat. Even though the evening air had cooled, I stopped to pee, and it came out syrupy color. I was dangerously dehydrated. But I kept walking. Eventually I stumbled down an old fire road, a gravel maintenance route that hadn't seen a truck in years. Relief washed over me, until I realized I had no idea which direction led to civilization. I turned right, praying to anything listening that it was the right call. The sun dipped below the ridgeline, and the woods swallowed the light. Within minutes, it was pitch dark, except for the glow of the sky behind the trees. My thoughts spiraled. I imagined lying down on the trail and just never getting up. I wondered if someone would find my body before the coyotes did. I kept whispering to myself, just keep going. One more mile. One more bend. And then I heard water. A creek trickled alongside the road. For a brief moment, I thought about drinking from it. My lips were cracked and stinging. My tongue felt like felt. But something told me not to. I remembered stories of people drinking stagnant creek water and ending up violently ill, which would only put me in an even worse situation. So I kept walking. The pain in my Achilles was unbearable. The skin had split from the constant rubbing of my shoe, and I could feel blood soaking into my socks. My thighs were raw, and my shoulders ached so badly I thought they might detach. I kept moving like a wind-up toy set on low power, just dragging forward through the darkness. And then I saw lights, not a flashlight, not a fire, but real lights, warm golden light filtering through the trees. I followed it, stumbling through the brush, and came out in front of an old, white-painted farmhouse that had been converted into a bed and breakfast. It looked like something out of a dream. Lace curtains, a wraparound porch, a hand-carved sign that read Dogwood Hollow Inn. I didn't even knock. I just walked up the steps. Before I could reach the door, a woman came out holding a camera and said, "Excuse me, could you take our picture?" I must have looked like death, mud-caked, bleeding, and probably ghostly pale, but the camera was already in my hands. I took 3 shaky pictures of her and her family on the lawn, and she smiled like there was nothing wrong. Then I stumbled into the lobby and found the bathroom. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Blood, sweat, and grime. My lips were bright red like I'd eaten berries. I bent over the sink and drank from the tap like an animal. They ended up calling my friends and driving me to the ranger station the next morning. I never got a straight answer on which trail I took, or how I got so lost. Some of the rangers said they'd heard of hikers wandering off trails in those parts of the Ozarks, places where even the topographic maps don't always match the land. As I was waiting for the ranger to pick me up that morning, an older guy who stumbled in started a conversation with me, and alluded to the fact that when it gets real quiet, people can get lost and not found. That creeped me out something. I haven't hiked in the Ozarks since, and sincerely do not plan to. This happened a few years ago, around late February. I was 23, and my buddy Josiah and I had decided to do an overnight camping trip in the Ozarks, not far from the Mark Twain National Forest. It was that strange in-between season. Winter was still clinging on, but spring was whispering in the air. No leaves on the trees yet, but it had warmed up enough to hit about 60 degrees that afternoon, perfect for a bit of hiking and a little plinking. We hiked a few miles into this little plateau above a ridge, just west of Eminence, Missouri. We'd camped there before, and it always felt like a secluded and peaceful spot. We set up camp around 3 p.m., cracked open the bourbon and settled in. Just 2 friends, a .22 rifle, a roaring fire, and good conversation, the kind you can only really get when it's just you and your buddy, alone. We talked about college, relationships, and how the world seemed to be unraveling. Josiah, for all his backwards experience, wasn't exactly the most practical guy. He was loyal and had a good gut for danger, which would come in handy. At around 8 p.m., as we fed more kindling into the fire, we started to hear coyotes calling from the next ridge over. Totally normal out here. Missouri coyotes are loud, but usually timid. We figured they were just making their way down the ridge, maybe heading for the creek basin to hunt. But over the next hour, the howls didn't fade. Eventually, the woods went quiet. The fire popped and crackled, and I grabbed my flashlight and swept the tree line. That's when I saw a half circle of glowing yellow eyes reflecting in the beam back at us. There were at least 6 of them, maybe more. They weren't retreating, they were watching. Now, as you may know, coyotes generally don't attack people. But I tell you now, to have 6 pairs of eyes, and maybe more, staring at you in the darkness, basically surrounding you, knowing that they mostly don't attack humans, doesn't exactly fill you with a sense of ease. I was nearly crapping myself, and that's putting it lightly. Josh handed me the rifle and took the flashlight. I chambered around and kept it low. We stood back to back with the fire behind us, listening to the twigs snapping and breathing sharp. Every time Josiah lit up one of the coyotes, it would bark, then slip behind a tree, like it was a game to them. These weren't healthy coyotes. They were lean, and they had a look of something that's gotten desperate. We stood there for what felt like hours, frozen in place, rifle ready, flashlight scanning. Every few minutes they'd test the line, move a little closer, bark, retreat. They were sizing us up. They were starving, maybe they were sick. It was like they forgot to be afraid. Then as suddenly as it started, they were gone. They melted into the darkness of the woods. and we heard the howls pick up again across the next ridge. We didn't sleep much. I kept the rifle next to my sleeping bag and one eye open. Josiah said he kept dreaming he was being watched. Morning came, and then the real problem. A full-on snowstorm had rolled in overnight, temperatures had dropped into the teens, and there was about 3 inches already falling. Forecast hadn't mentioned anything like this. We skipped breakfast, tore down the camp in a flurry of numb hands and frostbitten fingertips, packed everything away in under an hour. Our trail was buried, and we were going to have to bushwhack out with a map and compass. Visibility was dropping fast. We identified a series of peaks and a creek we crossed the day before, plotted a course and headed out. Snow was deepening with every step. 2 hours in, we hit the creek. The bridge we crossed was miles out of the way. There was no time. We had to cross it here. Josiah went one way and I went the other, looking for a downed tree or anything that could be used. He found a narrow trunk stretching across the freezing water, barely 3 feet above. I crawled across, straddling it, and watched helplessly as my knife slipped out of my pocket into the icy water. Josiah came next, but he slipped in and dunked his foot. We found a rocky outcropping and tried to get his foot warm, got a dry pair of socks from my bag and got him moving again. But the foot was a ticking clock. We pushed the final few miles hard, snow almost 6 inches deep. When we finally saw my SUV through the trees, I nearly cried. We piled into the car, threw our gear into the back, and I cranked the heat. The sound of the engine coming to life was the most beautiful noise I'd heard in days. The drive back over the mountain was slow and careful, and when we reached my farmhouse just outside Birch Tree, we drank hot coffee, fried up eggs, and laughed until we cried. We knew we'd almost died out there twice. Camping in the Ozarks is beautiful, but it doesn't take much to turn a peaceful weekend into a survival situation. And I don't know what made those coyotes come for us that night, but I haven't camped without a loaded rifle since. This happened to me during my junior year of college. For context, I'm a 22-year-old female, and at the time I was driving back to school after a long weekend visiting my family near the Illinois-Indiana border. I was heading to the University of Arkansas, and I usually took the interstates through St. Louis down to Fayetteville. But on this particular trip, I made a last-minute decision to take the scenic route through the Ozarks. It was early March, and the weather had been decent until the forecast warned of a system rolling through central Missouri. I figured the winding back highways might be safer than the ice-slicked interstate shoulders. I also liked that these rural routes kept me alert. Speed limit changes, sharp curves, old country towns you'd blink and miss. I'd taken them before, and besides, the thought of wide open sky and scenery that wasn't just endless highway did something to please me. By the time I hit the Mark Twain National Forest area, it was well after dark. The roads were pitch dark with no shoulder light, just dense forest pressing up on either side of the 2-lane highway. Somewhere just south of Salem, Missouri, I had come to a complete stop. Flashing lights bounced across the trees ahead, red and white, cutting through the mist. A serious wreck up the road, maybe a logging truck, maybe a deer strike, hard to say. Emergency crews waved us through single file, and for about 10 minutes traffic crawled past the scene. I saw a crumpled SUV in a ditch, and an orange tarp stretched over something. Maybe someone didn't make it. I tried not to look for too long. As we got moving again, I noticed a truck behind me. Not a large semi, just an old boxy pickup with one working headlight. It had been behind me since the accident scene, but I didn't think much of it at first. People in the Ozarks drive pickups. That's not strange. What was strange was how close he stayed, like dangerously close. I tapped my brakes a few times to warn him off, but nothing. He rode my bumper through the curves, and when I straightened out on a stretch of road, he flicked on his brights and left them on, blinding me through my mirrors. I switched off my podcast and kept my eyes trained on the rear view. I was beginning to feel sick. There were no towns nearby, just trees and ditches and the occasional gravel road that disappeared into the dark. The truck wouldn't pass, wouldn't drop back. He kept flashing his brights and tailing me too close for comfort. I sped up and so did he. I slowed down, he slowed down too. For over half an hour I tried everything I could to shake him off. I took a random left onto a narrow gravel country road, something I would never do at night. The rain was coming harder now, and my tires slid a little on the loose rock, but I kept going. And a minute later, his truck headlights turned in behind me. That's when I knew this wasn't some impatient driver. This man was following me, and we were deep in the woods. I felt my chest tighten. Cell signal was almost non-existent out here, and I looked down. 1 bar, no data. The one time I needed GPS to call 911, I was alone on a forgotten road with nothing but dark trees and a stranger chasing me through the hills. I didn't cry, not yet. I just kept driving. I remembered that about 20 minutes ahead was a ranger station. It wasn't always manned, but it had floodlights and cameras. I kept my speed steady, trying not to fishtail on the wet gravel. The truck stayed close, lights flooding my cab. I swear I could hear him honking now, long, angry blasts that echoed through the woods. Finally, I saw the silhouette of the ranger station through the trees. I didn't stop. I just barreled into the gravel lot, slid sideways into a space near the building and grabbed my phone. There was still no signal, but the floodlights popped on as they were motion activated. And for a second I saw everything. The truck had stopped at the edge of the lot, just idling. I couldn't see the driver's face. His windows were too dark. But I could see the silhouette of a man who was just watching me. I had my phone in my hand and held it up like I was recording, hoping the cameras on the station were working. The truck sat there for maybe 15 seconds, engine rumbling. Then the guy flipped off his headlights, backed up, and drove off the way he'd come. There were no plates on the rear. I stayed at that station for nearly an hour, locked in my car with my hazard lights on. I didn't have the nerve to leave until a sheriff's cruiser showed up. I flagged him down and gave him a rundown of everything. He said I probably did the right thing, and I wasn't the first woman to report something similar along that stretch of road in the last few years. He told me they'd had issues lately, with a few remote properties being used for some unsavory purposes. He didn't go into detail, but he gave me an escort back to a main road and said if I ever see a vehicle trying to scare me like that again, do exactly what I did. Go somewhere with lights, cameras and people, and don't go home until I was sure they had gone. I didn't sleep much that night, and I never took the route through the Ozarks again. The forest is beautiful, yeah, but out there between the hills and the hollows, some people take advantage of just how far away you are from help, and I don't want to be in that position again. This happened to me and my cousin a few years ago, deep in the Ozark backroads in Missouri. My cousin and I had just finished a late visit with friends in Western Plains and were driving north to pick up my brother from a buddy's place. It's only a couple of hours, but most of the route runs through narrow, unlit highways with no shoulder, steep drop-offs and dense woods. It was near 1 a.m. when we first noticed the car. We were coming up behind an old black Crown Vic, with no markings, no lights, nothing on the dash, just a boxy silhouette coasting well under the speed limit, doing maybe 45 in a 60. We figured it was a retired cop car or something, but the longer we trailed it, the weirder we felt. The thing looked completely blacked out, tinted windows, no visible plate, not even reflective tape. And it didn't make sense for something to be driving that slow through that stretch of Highway 63 unless they were lost or looking for something. It appeared to us that it looked like it needed to be stealthy, but they weren't being particularly so. We waited until a passing lane opened up. I hit the gas to get around them, and that's when he kept up speed. We tried to match him, push a little harder, 80, then 90, and he kept matching us. I glanced down and saw the speedometer creeping past 100. That was enough for me. I backed off and dropped down behind him again.